We're live, maybe. Today is Thursday, January 2nd, and this is our first weekly meeting of 2020. Today, we're going to talk about all of the stuff that went into Backdrop 115 and all the stuff that didn't go into Backdrop 115, and a couple of other things too. But before we get to that, we have a couple of people in the community that are requesting new contrib projects. So I wanted to welcome Kaiser JB and Padprint, who are requesting the Bootstrap Site Alert module and Hierarchical Select. Both of those modules, I think, are actually pretty good first port modules. The Bootstrap Site Alert module is very, very straightforward. The only tricky part is that it uses hook page alter, which we don't have in Backdrop. But hook page alter, in that instance, all it does is add a couple of JavaScript files. So that could very easily be done in a pre-process page instead. And the hierarchical select module also adds JavaScript. So I think both of these, if either of you wanted to give that a shot, could be fairly straightforward first ports. So could be fun. We also have a couple of new contributed projects this week with official releases. The CK Editor Indent Outdent module adds two missing and loved features to the CK Editor core module. I'm not sure why they're not in core, but they aren't. And then there's another module called Mail Disguise, which was also released this week. So thanks everybody for working on contrib projects. So let's turn it over to Nate to talk about Backdrop Core.
All right, we had an action-packed week this week. Yesterday was code freeze or feature freeze for the 115 version. And so we were hurrying around and getting mostly the 115 items, the ones that we could, completed. But before we get into that, 114, the current version, we have a couple of issues that were also fixed in the last week. One of them is number fields can't be empty, 3873. That pull request was merged, and date time tests are failing sometimes depending on the time of day, which it looks like we lost the issue number out of the agenda. But that issue, we merged it and we haven't seen any problems since then. So far, so good on that, which I'm excited to have fewer test failures happening intermittently. Let's see. A new item that was brought up or recently brought up is that sometimes menu items, especially in the admin menu, the sorting is a little bit incorrect, actually. And so we have this issue 2655 that it looks like, I'm not actually sure if it was BW Panda or Olaf or Jeff. Someone identified that the problem apparently is actually a problem in the backdrop sort function. Like the backdrop sort function itself doesn't sort correctly in some situations, which is kind of a big problem because we use that for sorting just about everywhere. So issue 2655 reworks backdrop sort to solve that problem, but it's also causing some PHP warnings and failing tests right now. So that it looks like it's promising though, and kind of interesting, but yeah, we need that pull request probably updated. Yeah, and Jen posted here, and also we need to benchmark it to make sure that we're not introducing some kind of regression there. I posted a comment on there how to benchmark. There are tools like not XHProf anymore, but Tideways and Blackfire.io that you can use to benchmark page requests in general. But for something like this, where it's one function, like we'll be fine just using like timer start and timer stop and just like measuring in milliseconds, like how fast calls to that function occur when you pass in a variety of inputs to it. So there's no need to get super fancy there with the performance testing.
But that function is called everywhere, and it does different things under different circumstances. So how do we know we're testing all of the circumstances that we use it
on? Well, I'd probably say just give it a couple of different like large inputs, one that's nested and one that's nested in multiple or not nested and one that is. And
But like a menu or where do we even, like, do you know what circumstances under which it's used? Or
well, we'd have to search the code base probably if we wanted to find the individual pages.
text file that has like 166 places that it's called or whatever, but I wasn't sure that was actually going to be useful.
Yeah, because I don't think like if you benchmark a page and backdrop sort is only a small part of that overall page, you probably won't be able to really identify
Yeah.
how much of that is backdrop sort unless you use Tideways or XHProf or something like that. But
Yeah.
I could come up with some kind of a example test case for that, I guess.
That would be amazing.
I actually have a XHProf runs on every single thing my computer does
Nice.
automatically anyway. So
is it actually XHProf?
it's using it's not XHProf.
Okay, it's probably
where is
Tideways
it?
then.
I think it might be Tideways, but it's been a long time since I had to update it. So yeah, I can just come up with a large set of sample data and test it.
Okay,
Great.
awesome. I'm not sure if the current pull request is actually the final version yet because it's actually throwing some errors in places, but it might only be on like certain kinds of input that it throws those errors. I'm not sure yet. Anyway, so 1.14.3, yeah, we fixed some things, which is great. However, the next version of 1.14 probably isn't going to come out until January 15th when 1.15 comes out. So we normally release the last version of the previous release at the same time as the first version of the next one, unless there's security updates later, and then there'll be yet another one. But so those fixes, it's great that they're in 1.14.3. They're also, of course, going to be in 1.15. And so that's where we are with those things. For 1.15, we've got the final release of it coming out January 15th. So in a little bit less than 2 weeks, that will be coming out. And the things that we got into it this week include we did get the image library modal into image fields, issue 3297. That's very exciting. It makes it so that anywhere you have an image field, you can now enable the ability to browse and reselect an existing image. And this user interface matches that of CKEditor that allows you to do something really similar when you click the image button in CKEditor. So the UIs look pretty similar, although the underlying code is kind of different because the image field stuff is all server side and CKEditor is like almost entirely client side. So there's some difference in implementation, but the user interface ends up looking really similar in both cases, which is very cool. The way that also ended up is also neat, that the enhancement was made to the managed file element. We did an API expansion on the managed file element to make it so that you can specify a view as a form API property. I think it's called pound browser view, I think, that you put on a managed file element. And that will make it so that any file element anywhere can now reuse files with any view, which is pretty cool. But the only place that we're actually using it, so the API is expanded, but the only place you can see it right now is on image fields. There's a single checkbox for enable browser, and it uses the out-of-box image library view by default. But you could use that on other things like on a file field somewhere, but right now it's only through the API. So that's really cool. I'm very excited about that. There's some other features in there that didn't get completed though. Graham72, who was leading the charge on this for quite a while, also wanted to include things like when you click on an image, it would tell you information about that image, like its dimensions and file size and things like that, to distinguish between different versions of an image that might look similar. But we removed those things because we didn't want to introduce discrepancies between CKEditor and image fields. We want them to be the same. So it's possible that those things will probably be separated out into a different issue, and hopefully we'll be able to use some of that code that didn't make it. Let's see, next up, the recent news block on the dashboard, issue 3566. Tim, you're here. Why don't you give us the update on the recent news block?
Well, sure. We now have we have a content type on backdropcms.org called public notifications. And if we publish a notification there, which would involve a title, a snippet of descriptor text, and a URL, that will show up on a block, a new block, which will be added to the dashboard of any new Backdrop CMS sites. So we have a way to communicate sort of important events to backdrop site editors and users. So there's a follow-up issue to talk about setting some guidelines for how we use that block, what kinds of things we want to communicate, and how we make that decision. So, but it's I think it's exciting in terms of our ability to announce things, I don't know, like virtual user group meetings to users, or certainly important blog posts or important releases. I don't know. And I welcome people's ideas and what they think would be valuable to have us. Valuable things we should use that block for. And that will only, So the block will become available if you have an existing site. Is the block available now for you to add to your dashboard? I never tested that. I assume it should be.
Yeah, it's available for you to add to your dashboard, but it won't appear automatically.
Right. Only if
update.
you're right. It'd only be if a new site, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's all.
Yeah, it's very cool. We have a couple of follow-ups on that one. I think, what news appears on the dashboard is that actually 625? Yeah, 625. Wow, I'm surprised that issue is a lot older than.
No, it's a backdropcms.org issue. It's in a different issue too.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, yeah, issue 625 in the backdropcms.org issue queue is policy discussion about what notifications we should use, and then issue 4254 is a follow-up to add caching to it, because right now every time you view your dashboard, it hits backdropcms.org on the fly, which isn't great for performance, especially since it's server side. So we have an issue to switch that out to using a cache and then updating the news announcements on cron jobs instead. Okay, well, those are the two issues that we did complete that we mention every week. But it's also worth covering some items that got merged in that we don't talk about all the time. And that includes issue 3972, which is some work that Indigo Zella had been working on regarding date and time form elements. That we have this date pop-up element that is provided by date module, and we had been using that on the node form for the post date, but we switched that out now. Issue 3972 adds HTML5 date and time elements instead of using like a jQuery UI date pop-up. If you use the browser native HTML5 date and time form elements, you get a very similar user interface to the old jQuery UI pop-up, and it's less work on our side, and it's better device compatibility for like mobile phones and things like that. So that's really cool. That issue only updates the post date form element. It doesn't actually update the date module date pop-up element yet, but it's still a great enhancement. And I was surprised to actually see that we had a big hole in our HTML5 support, that we didn't even have pound type equals date and pound type equals date time previously. So now we do. So that's great. We now have 3 new HTML5 form elements supported in Form API. And Jen, I noticed that yesterday you were so nicely updating the Form API reference page to include those new elements, which is great because that's something that we frequently forget to do. So thank you for doing that. Let's see. Next up, so a small feature is issue 4200 that menus right now, the drop-down menu system that we have out of the box on a desktop computer, when you move your mouse over a drop-down, it pops open. And issue 4200 is a feature to make it so that you can choose now to toggle between whether it's a hover behavior or a click behavior. So on a touch device, it's always touch to open and touch to close, or touch once to open and then second touch to go there. But this makes it so that you can choose the behavior on a desktop device, whether it's hover or click. So some people prefer one way over the other. I always note that possibly there might be some accessibility implications about doing one way or the other as well. So that's really cool. But that one has a follow-up. Issue 4253 is just a discussion about what text we should use for that particular feature. So that's something that we'll need to sort out here in the next 2 weeks. Issue 4253. Let's see. Yeah, other smaller items. I won't go over all of these in details, but Boolean fields, we added more options to make it so that they display better. Previously, the output of Boolean fields was not excellent. And now you can choose the way that they output in the same way that you, similar to the way that you can choose the way they output in views with like a checkbox or check mark or an X, yes, no, enabled, disabled, like much better display options for when Boolean fields are turned on and off. Provide a UI to define watchdog severity levels, issue 3326. This was a hidden system-wide setting that previously had only been available in Devel module. We put it into the logging page primarily because now we have this deprecated logging level that is turned off by default. And that's a highly useful feature to be able to turn on and off, and now it's exposed in the user interface without needing to install Devel. We're talking about this one before the meeting. Disable comments by default on new content types, issue 4156. A one-liner change by Tim, which is very welcome. Just that now, creating a new content type doesn't turn on comments, which is great. Let's see, and lastly, we removed all stop words from path alias. Path alias out of the box, or sorry, path. In Drupal 7 it's called Path Auto, and in Backdrop it's just part of Path module. But there's a section for strings to remove. The Path Auto defaulted to removing words like the and sometimes prepositions. And so things like from or up or by, all of these words would get removed from your URLs, but then that would frequently end up changing the meaning of the URL into something else, or like keywords would be left out and then it wouldn't make any sense anymore. So issue 3931 just simply removes all of those stop words by default so that all words are left in URLs by default, starting with 115. What was that? No, okay, I thought somebody said something. Anyway, that's it. Those are the set of changes that just got in recently for 115. There's a couple of other ones as well, but I won't go over those again. So the things that didn't get put in were quite a few things. Better workflow states, issue 1475. That Doc Wilmot was working on would make it so that forward revisions would be possible in core. We thought that this one was really close, and we worked late into the day yesterday trying to get this completed, but we ended up having to postpone it. Jen, do you want to discuss anything about that?
Well, there was a lot that was going on, right? First, we were hold on, I don't remember. Okay, so these are both suggestions from Gregory that I think are optional. I don't know. No.
You don't have anything to add on that? Okay. Yeah, there were some things that we posted. There's new additional comments on that issue. It would be nice. I'm not sure if I want to ask Doc Wellman to do actually more. I think that we really just had some concerns about what was left in there. Like it still was doing, it was leading to some confusing situations. And so I'm not totally sure if removing more features is the right way to go, or if we need to fix the features that are left in there. And now we kind of have a choice to go either way with that.
Question. My memory is that the last status is that you were going to remove all the UI control over it, and it was just going to be adding capacity in the back end. But it sounded like yesterday, like you still had some UI in the pull request. Is that true? Is that still in there at this stage?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's why it was confusing that there was the ability to edit previous revisions was still in there. And that led to some weird problems. Yeah. So I would think that removing, first of all, I'm not even sure that makes sense, being able to edit a previous revision. I do like the concept, though, of being able to set a different active revision. I think that would be quite helpful. But
I don't know, because if you can only ever edit the active revision, what's the point of having forward revisions? Like you need to be able to edit a draft before it goes live. And so if you have a version of the page that's live and you have a version of the page you're working on, you're going to need to be able to edit the future version.
Right, I would agree. But you wouldn't be able to edit past ones.
Right. So right now there's no distinction between a future one and a past one, which I think is a problem. Like, I don't think we track, like, has this revision ever been published? Or has this revision ever been active? So it's just like a little more complicated than I think we'd really thought through until we were trying to use it. And then we were like, oh, hold on, there's other stuff going on here. So
yeah, I see what you're saying, that I was thinking the usefulness of it would be if you publish something and then you realize, oops, that was incorrect, then you would just go back to a previous revision, and instead of making a copy of the previous revision, which is what happens right now, you would just flip back to the previous one and just activate that one. But you're right, when you wanted to reintroduce those changes, you wouldn't be able to edit the one that was in the future at that point. Yeah, it gets a little bit messy.
yeah. So I think maybe like I'm not against editing revisions entirely. We just need to make that like workflow more sensible. Like there are some weird things that came up where like when you were editing any revision, I always called it a draft, whether it was a future revision or a past revision. So we need some kind of distinction there. And then we also need the like workflow message to populate. So right now when you create a new revision, you can add a message, but the current message doesn't show up when you're editing something that had a message. And then it also gives you the ability to create a new revision from the previous revision. So it's a little bit weird. I mean, I could see that utility being where it's like, oh, I made one revision and now I'm going to throw this out, but I want another one that's based on this one. But like, just, it gets really confusing because you're like, which revision am I starting from? So yeah, it just kind of was like, oh, we didn't really think this through as much as I think was necessary.
Yeah. So yes, Tim, it ended up still having some user interface things in it, and that's what wasn't really worked out at the time. Let's see, other things. Let's see, Gregory's issue of being able to re-enable disabled text formats. I think that there was some feedback requested, or sorry, some changes requested that Gregory didn't have time to get his pull request updated before feature freeze. So that's still, it's postponed to 116, but it's still like really pretty close, and there's feedback there to act on, and it currently needs its pull request updated. Let's see, move contents of the managed file display page. This is consolidating the managed display and managed file display pages together. It's issue 4031. I don't think that there was actually any real movement on this like all release long, was there, Jen? Yeah. So that one's yeah, it's got some challenges on it. Let's see, we'll keep going through these lists of things that didn't get in. Signatures, digital signatures on packages, issue 1992. This is the issue that I was pushing forward. It's still, it's not in 116, and the way that we're approaching this is still working in Contrib. There's a module called CodeSign that we're working on building out that functionality there and getting it deployed to backdropcms.org. That's still where we are today. And lastly, Entity Caching Core, issue number 74. This one, I postponed it because I didn't want to put in something that was a large API change at the last minute. However, Doc Wilmot reviewed this, and I went through and re-rolled it based on Doc Wilmot's feedback. I think that this one is RTBC at this point. It's marked RTBC, and I think it's ready to go, but it would be much safer to be the first thing in 116 than the last thing in 115. So that one's marked RTBC, and we'll get it in once we branch for the once we branch off 115 into a maintenance branch. So that's the status of things. Kind of as usual, the deadline drives a lot of activity. So I have to say I really love deadlines because things finally happen at that point. And then there was also a lot of activity on things that you know, aren't going to happen in 115, but we still generated a lot of movement on a lot of peripheral issues related to these other things as well. So I love deadlines. They work really well. This next couple of weeks, we do have 2 or 3 issues that we have to get fixed before 115 comes out, and they're in the 115 milestone. But other than that, you know, now we're at the point where the only thing that we're changing in 115 might be like strings here and there, possible small UI changes and things of that sort. So we still allow UX changes even after feature freeze within reason. But for the most part, from here until 2 weeks from now, 115 will just be getting buttoned up. And then once it's out, then it'll be a free for all again, you know, working on features in 116. Also, geez, 116, we're really getting up there.
Can I ask, as someone who will probably be working on the blog post for the release, what, like the first 2 issues, the library modal damage fields and recent news are things to highlight. Of these other things, it's not clear to me what, if any of those are really significant enough to like put in a press release. Does anybody have opinions on that?
The ones we put in the preview release notes, we figured were the most important, and I tried to put them in sort of like most exciting to least exciting order too.
Okay.
So I would say that would be my preference, but maybe look at them, and if there's nothing that like looks pretty for a screenshot, that might not really be a priority anymore.
Yeah, I think the date time ones, they'll be photogenic, you know, because you can include a screenshot from a phone as well as from a computer, showing the way that those things work or look. Don't use Safari though on a Mac, because it actually got a regression rather than an improvement.
Safari.
But yeah, I think that's, I mean, you could mention the other things as like bullets, but I think there's just kind of those, I would say there's those three things: the date thing, the dashboard announcements, and the image modal. I think those are the ones that are going to be photo worthy.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Do you guys have any other things you guys would like to discuss? Okay, well, let's call it a meeting then. Thank you, everybody, for the great week and for all the work. I know it was the end of the holiday. I personally was taking a lot of time off and was, didn't put in a lot of time up until yesterday, when it was just like everything. I kind of allocated yesterday as the sacrificial vacation day. But yeah, we got a whole bunch of stuff done, and there was a lot of activity across the board. And so, yeah, thank you guys for all of your efforts and for spending some of your holiday with us on Backdrop. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. Talk to you guys again next week.